this book because we thought there was a whole gap missing. Of course, the difficulty, if you ever mention the word Catholic women's ordination, is often a big turn-off. But I'd like to say the ages here today range from 30s to 93. It's wonderful, you know. It's and I'm very pleased to be here because I live in that dirty place called London, and there's too much going on in London, and a lot of this started in London, and it comes in the first chapter here. And the people who started it was because we worked closely with the Anglican Church. You remember the Anglicans got the vote for women's ordination in 1992, November the 11th, which is imprinted certainly on my soul, because I was there with a young woman called Nicky Arthey, and when they came, the Anglican women came, it was in Dean's Yard behind Westminster Abbey, those of you who know Dean's Yard, and when the vote came through, the women were not allowed to rejoice in case they hurt the men who didn't like it. This whole question is so deep, and it's not just about ordination. It's symptomatic of what's wrong with the churches, really. It's an enormous problem. And in this little book we have here, to our best ability, we try to write something about why the problem has been so deep about women through all the centuries. And in every century it's been different. The second millennium has been much tighter than the first millennium, as you probably know. The first millennium, empresses, they ran councils. And because, of course, there was no communication, so everybody could do as they liked. No one knew, really, hardly anyone knew about papacy until the end of the after 19th century. Who didn't know? No one hardly knew Thomas Aquinas. It wasn't popular in his time. You know, all these myths that we'd lived with, and this is a real attempt. Whether we failed or not, I don't know. That's up to judgment. But we've tried to show the depth of the problem. And actually, the tremendous importance for women to be officially allowed to image God. Because if you can't do that, as second-class citizens, you can do what you like with women. So the whole problem of women and poverty and women and violence is closely tied up, and this is where some people come off their chairs. It's closely tied up with the non-ordination of women. It's not an extra, it is actually extremely deep. We don't want ordination as it is, and I know a lot of men don't want ordination as it is. And the whole clericalism of the church is something we all have to deal with. But that's why really this was done. You won't get the argument of why women aren't ordained. You can get that on John Vinegar's website. It's there in every language, 141 languages now he's nearly translated it into. And I think we know that there is absolutely nothing against women's ordination in theology or in scriptures. And that was found, that came out in in 1977, when it was pronounced women could never be priests because they're not male. And I'm not translating that into, but use your imagination. And it's absolutely stupid. And the problem is, women's ordination, in my opinion, is in the wrong slot. It should not be in the theology. It's a non-theology. It should be in the social teaching of the church, because it's been culturized. So that's really important, and that's why we wrote it, this book. And we also have done an explanation of what feminism is, because it's a feminist book. And I'm very proud of using that word. The more feminist you are, the more Christian you are. And that's written by Elizabeth Johnson, and she's an outstanding woman theologian in America. And I know feminist women, are no feminist men. In other words, they can see that gender, gender's there, and we have differences. But what Christianity does, or what God does, is God unites differences and transcends them. And that's really important, and that comes out a lot, Chris, in Mariology. That's what it's about. So it is an attempt, and we have used throughout, Pippa has in her part, we've used throughout the people who are well accepted, the modern people, because that's important to have a lot of backup on this. Now the first, at the beginning, you can actually dot around in this book, but the first 3 chapters are experience, and we based it on standing on the piazza of Westminster Cathedral, the London one.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been there more, God, when I think how long, we've been there at least 20 years, must be getting more now. But then it was taken up by other parts of the country. And going public, which people couldn't understand, the reason was we could not get our voice out anywhere else. And that's why people go public. That's why the suffragettes and the suffragists went public, which was, I'm sure you know a lot about it. It's a remarkable movement, an extraordinary movement. And they always had to look very, using the word feminine. And that's okay. They always had to wear a hat, you had to look good, and all this kind of thing. But the greatness of that movement was it joined together the well-educated women and the non-educated. And I don't know any other movement, some of you might be historians here, have actually done that. So the first 3 chapters, and the first chapter Pippa and I wrote together. I did the first 10 years, and I said to Pippa, you've got to do the next, although we've all lived through most of them. And that's quite easy to read. And it is, we use the media from the beginning. We used all modern techniques. Now they're so modern that pattern them. They all use Twitter, and they use Facebook, and they use, I don't know what the next thing is, but all the modern forms. But the media has been our key. And even now, as people like Pat and Pippa, they do a lot of media now, because we've had some media training. And the media like younger faces. But it's true. And actually, you have to use your wits about this kind of thing. But when the media wants someone to do something, say something contrary to what an official church thing, they always phone us. Isn't that true? They phone us, and it's been like that from the beginning. And the first chapter will explain things. And I don't know if any of you saw the buses. That we had buses when, who was it John?
Benedict.
Benedict.
We'll talk about that.
Yeah, but so that's all the first chapter. And then Pippa's done one on, well, let's tell you what she's done, and then 2 chapters. And Pippa's done experience, really, okay? And I've done 3 chapters, and God help me, I put it all in 3 chapters. I've tried to trace through the fault line that runs through all religions, so that includes Anglicanism, Methodism, any of them, because we were all one at one time. We weren't broken up into these bits and bobs. And then that's the history chapter, and it's brushstrokes. It's trying to give people who haven't had the opportunity to see how there have been so many changes around, and how it's so difficult now for Francis. I can talk about that later. And then I've done a chapter on symbolism, and that was the most difficult of all. And I'm not even going to start that. But since we got a Mary, not a student, but somebody really knows a lot about Mary. But this chapter about symbolism is absolutely crucial, absolutely crucial. And it's Professor Tina Beattie who's done a lot of work on symbolism. And then I threw a chapter at the end on who and what is church. I've been at this a long time, and that is to say, and I've used the thoughts of Poole members, and I've been amazed how much sort of our unsophisticated speech fits in with some of these best ecclesiologists who are what is church in the world, including some from Sri Lanka. So we try to. So it's an attempt, and I hope that, you know, if you buy it, that you get something out of it, and it will help us all to open up this question. It's much more than ordination, but we can't avoid it because it's what it symbolises. So, okay. Pippa, do you want to do anything here?
Yeah. Pippa's going to say something now. I don't know what. Something.
Yeah, we've got 10 minutes. Yes. Now, I think.
Thank you.
I think we wanted to talk about the buses, didn't we?
Yes.
That actually one of our highlights within Quo was during Pope Benedict's visit. Bearing in mind, you probably know that we are not supposed to discuss women's ordination,
Yes.
and nobody has actually, stopped that interdict. It's still there. So we had a wonderful opportunity. One of our members suggested that we actually got some buses with a strap line on them, and I'll let Pat tell you a little bit about that.
Oh, well, yeah, okay. Well, we took all the money we had to buy these buses, and we had a bequest. Somebody died and left us some money, and we spent it all on these buses. And there were 15 buses. It's not quite right what it says in the book, but never mind. And they went. And the man I spoke to on the phone when I ordered them was very interested in our cause. So he said, well, I'm going to put you on the golden route, because most people had far more than 15, but we could only afford 15. And he said the golden route goes all past Westminster Cathedral, past the Houses of Commons and the House of Lords, and it also goes up Oxford Street. So it goes to all the places where tourists go, basically. And when the Pope came, we were all outside Westminster Cathedral with our banners, and the bus came past, you know, and then it went past again. We were having something to eat in the pub, the Shakespeare there. It was very hot, and the doors were open, and we could see out. And there were some priests at a table who'd obviously come over with the who were looking very askance at us. And the bus went past. Pope Benedict, ordained women now! Exclamation mark. And we all went, yeah! And it was really good. You know? The priest sort of tried to hide and just disappeared.
They were looking at that.
But actually, that was 2010. So, I mean, I think we've gone from strength to strength since then, because I think the difference, what Myra was saying about media, is now they ring us up, whereas before, in the early days, I think we rang them up to say, look, we're here. But now they want us to talk about anything and everything. We've actually said no to quite a lot, because we actually don't want to get involved in the big question. You know, like the beatification of Pope John Paul. We might have our own thoughts about it, but we don't really want to make that part of Quo. So we want to keep our agenda where we are, sort of thing. Anyway, is that enough?
Yes, that's fine. More than enough. I mean, I think in terms of media, what we have realised is that we have educated the media. Now they actually use some of the words and the language and the ideas that we have been talking about for some years, which, though we are not very visible in many ways, is gratifying to know that actually, they've listened to us. I want to talk a little bit about chapter 2 now, because that's really about some of the psychological impact for women, also for men, whose gifts are not being used or are being rejected. So I'd like you to look at if anybody hasn't got a book handy, there's a
Anybody
diagram.
not got a book?
If you have got a book, it's on page 33.
Oops.
Anybody need this?
Now, this model probably doesn't look very user-friendly, but it is. It's an internationally accredited model for coping with bereavement, loss, or change. And I've been using it over the years with people who are coping with losses other than bereavement. And basically, you'll see from the model that on the left-hand side, there is a circle that is loss-orientated, and basically that is about when you're coping with grief, with a loss of any kind or with a change, that you might look at some of the emotional aspects of that loss. And it was, at the time, it was thought to be what women did, because they actually did the research with older women and older men, where probably roles were a bit more stratified. Though I have discovered a lot of men actually predominantly cope with grief, loss or change with the emotions. And those emotions are often anger, guilt. And on the other side is the right-hand side is the restoration-orientated aspect of this model, which is no better or worse, and it was thought to be the so-called male way of coping. But I know many women who have said they are predominantly on this side. And it's really about how you manage that grief, loss or change. And so it's about attending to what you were being presented with and trying to do something about it. But the key aspect of this model is the oscillation between the two, moving from one to the other, backwards and forwards, up and down and round, which is why I think it is a much more real model than some of the linear, stratified sort of models. And a lot of the research that is going on now is about this place of oscillation, and it is considered to be the place of resilience. And if anyone here looks at some of the Richard Raw or the Joan Chittister material, it's about managing to hold the sad, difficult stuff and the more positive stuff as well. And that there's a more of a wholeness about being able to hold both together. So for example, our colour is purple. And I don't think it was realised straight away, was it, that that was one of the suffragettes' colours, but it was purple. Now, if you are predominantly someone who deals with the emotional aspects of grief, loss or change, you might be wearing purple as a sign of mourning. If you are predominantly restoration orientated, you might be wearing purple because it's a sign of priesthood and dignity. So do you see how you might actually both be doing the same thing, but coping with it slightly differently? So that's really the nub of that model. And some people have been quite interested that it has been used in a slightly different way from the bereavement world. But I've been using it over the years, having worked in a hospice and working with older people now, that actually it works when you are talking about the losses in your life. And we do realise that a lot of men also believe that within this institutional church, their gifts are not being used either. So that though this book is about Catholic women's ordination into a different kind of a church, we realise that this model is also quite useful for any reform group, because you're dealing with both. So I think that actually I've kind of given you the nub of what the model was about, and I think that place of oscillation is that place of resilience, is about equilibrium as well. Hello, Chris. Nice to see you. Sit down.
Excuse me. There's a seat here.
There's a seat here, Chris.
You're going to get away with filming, I'm really sorry. Do you mind?
It's fine, no problem.
Thank you, Chris.
Safe.
Okay, thank you. So I'm just going to read just one little bit about where, where we want to be within ourselves, perhaps psychologically, emotionally, while we're actually trying to do this work, and where we want to see the kind of church that we want to have. And Myra's going to talk a bit more about that. But a healthy and aware equilibrium that is strong and inclusive. I was actually at a poverty conference last week, and there was someone from the Vatican who was talking about how inclusive our church is. And there was a kind of an intake of breath from the women, from the LGBTQ plus community, from laymen, from everybody. We're also wanting an emotional integration that draws on the strengths from our experiences, and we all in this room, you're packed with experience, that works to open the doors of a renewed church to women priests. An alignment always with Christ's vision for the church, which is responsive to the Spirit and recognises personality and cultural differences. The attainment of work and prayer for a church where women's and men's God-given gifts are recognised and shared. And finally, a church where lay people and priests share ministries within their communities with a priesthood that is characterised by openness and mutual empowerment of everyone's journey to wholeness. So that's what chapter 2 is about.
Stop there. Okay, that's pretty catchy.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so we've got a few
I've actually spoken
we've got
less than she
we've got
expected.
ahead of ourselves, so that's good. So now, if you just like to get into small groups, either in your rows or turn around.